Heidi, you were talking earlier about packaging, and I was thinking of EPR typically being more product or material specific. Looking at packaging in particular, what about the infrastructure in California? Let's say we're driving things with EPR. Can we handle it? Is there infrastructure? Does it get built because we have good EPR policies or laws?
Well, we know that just passing the carpet legislation not only saved the largest carpet recycler in the country from going under, which was LA Fiber, but we've created 204 jobs since that bill passed. We've gone from 4, which is I think pretty cool. And I don't know where Frank is, but we helped co-found the Build Infrastructure Now network. All right, Frank. And our team that's all working together now to try and keep the jobs here in California, because I became concerned when we were helping pass the carpet legislation that the phone, people started calling me from the recycling side and saying, we're in Delaware, but we'd like to site there, but we're never going to site in California. And I said, well, why? And, the rules that you guys have and the water issues and the cost of electricity, and they just went on and on. And so they were talking about siting in Nevada. And I said, wait a minute, why are we passing laws that are going to, benefit and create jobs in Nevada? We need the jobs here. We don't want this carpet getting shipped, which is very heavy, over the mountains. We want to keep it here. And so then we started becoming very aware that if we didn't put this in the conversation, that we were going to lose the jobs, and we were going to pass all the good rules, and everybody else would get the jobs, and that's not sustainable, and the politicians won't tolerate that. So we have to all be working together on legislative language, on benefits, on those carrots, to keep the businesses or incentivize them to stay and grow in California. We're very involved in that. Lynn France, who's vice chair of our board, is also on CRRA board, and she's on the policy committee, and we talked even yesterday about possibly making sure that the legislation that is going through the legislature goes through the policy committee and the bin, and make sure that this discussion of infrastructure is discussed amongst all of us that support recycling to make sure that we are creating the jobs here in California. Does that answer the question?
Anna, does that answer the question?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you. One of the things that came up, and I was thinking about some of the other responses, is that we do have health issues, community issues. Gary, with your background, what about wastewater? How does this tie in? How does AB 341 tie in clearly with health issues, with wastewater, and other community health issues?
Wow, I don't know.
Oh.
I can talk about wastewater a bit and biosolids and other things, but I don't know how it ties to 341.
All right, well, let's pass that.
Good job.
Scott.
I'll answer his question.
Thank you.
In one small way, which is, exactly. We're constantly looking for every single opportunity to get organics out of this landfill. They cause some of the worst problems in the landfill, fugitive methane emissions. And you do see a lot of, particularly the large haulers, looking for opportunities right now, but being nervous about investing in new alternative technologies when it comes to anaerobic digestion. They know that wastewater treatment plants work. They've been in place for a long time, so what we do see is some of the excess capacity for wastewater treatment plants now as a potential avenue to be the first recipients of some of the food waste that we're trying to get out of here. And so to the extent that their existing infrastructure helps us build the processing capacity that we need and help us learn the lessons of how we need to develop those collection programs, what the material needs to look like, the training programs. They're some of the most sensitive receptors, or receivers or processors, if you will, of the food waste. So I think we have a lot to learn, and we need to utilize that existing infrastructure to begin this process. Once more.
Organics has come up a few times now. Clearly the markets and infrastructure capacity is different, and motivation, financial incentives, if you call that, between Northern and California. What can CalRecycle do to help change that?
To help change, what are we trying to change?
There's differences between Northern California and Southern California. Siting issues, air quality, different policies in place, and different levels of enforcement. How do we level the playing field on this and get more organics out of the waste stream, more organics out of the landfill, and recover in some other fashion?
That sort of is the question, frankly, that we've all been struggling with for a long time. And there are certain things we just don't have control over. One of them is the U.S. Clean Air Act, Federal Clean Air Act. I think what we have to do is sort of divide these things into different buckets. The things we have some control over and the things we don't. Some things we don't have control over, we have to find workarounds. We're working pretty hard right now on that particular issue, and have been for some period of time, to classify and identify what the actual emissions are from different organic processing facilities, anaerobic digestion, composting, and I think we've done a fairly good job of that. Unfortunately, it may not matter, so it still is going to be very expensive to site to expand capacity in some air districts. Our job then is to find a way to make that happen, so we're working diligently to find basically pots of money. It's going to cost maybe $15, $20, $25 more per ton in some cases to site organics infrastructure. In some places in the state. But the environmental benefits that bring, if are properly recognized, should be funded. And what I mean by that is whether it's a GHG benefit, or a benefit of water reduction, or a reduction in use of pesticides, or chemical fertilizers, we are getting close to being able to quantify those things, and working with whether it's CDFA, or the Air Board, or the Water Board, to have them have sufficient interest in obtaining those environmental benefits that they're willing to help support the expansion of this infrastructure. So that's our work in CalRecycle.
So Mark, when we were talking before, they said, look, you're already ready to respond, so I wouldn't even ask the question, go ahead and respond.
I want to just take just a little bit to piggyback on what Scott was saying, maybe give him a little more credit than he has just described here. As we've been working on this organics policy, one of the things that became crystal clear in terms of talking to local governments and to waste haulers that are handling material in different regions of the state is that different communities are at different levels in terms of their readiness for an ambitious organics policy. And one of the concepts that Scott has helped put into the dialogue has been the notion that maybe the rules shouldn't, and timelines shouldn't be exactly the same for every community. There are communities in Northern California, in the Bay Area, that are absolutely ready to go in terms of ambitious, mandatory commercial recycling policies, in terms of large commercial enterprises, in terms of phasing out ABC, diversion credit for ABC, and that maybe it's okay to not even the playing field, but to have more ambitious policies that drive the development of infrastructure in the Bay Area, for example, than in Southern California. Because if we have to go lowest common denominator and come up with the organics mandates that are acceptable to Southern California, we're going to be 10, 15 years down the line, whereas the Bay Area is ready to go. And so let's put those policies in place and let's have differential timelines. I'm not sure if that was what you're going to ask, but that's one of the new ideas that's in this organics policy in terms of kind of this post-AB 939 discussion that we're having.
I was actually going to ask you what your favorite color is, but Gary?
Let me just add on to the discussion of wastewater treatment plants and organics, because there's two aspects of it. We know all the wastewater treatment plant operators in the county, and I've talked to them about these issues. They all digest their sludge now, or their biosolids now, so they're extracting energy from it. And so there isn't a lot of benefit to be had by joining with them to build a facility or something for food scrap, unless they have underutilized capacity. So East Bay Mud and San Leandro have some underutilized capacity. They can take in some food scraps to co-digest with the biosolids. And of course, piggybacking on that existing infrastructure is a smart thing to do. So that's something that may happen. But it's not enough underutilized capacity to solve our problem anywhere near entirely. It's a relatively small fraction. And so for those plants or any other plants in the county to help us solve the problem in a much bigger way, there would have to be new facilities built, which in concept could be co-located with their existing facilities, but in practice there's really not much space. So it doesn't work that way. We haven't explored that. The other aspect of it is what they do with their biosolids now. Most of our treatment plants in county send their biosolids to land application. So the nutrients are being recovered through land application after they've recovered energy. And it's very inexpensive, and it's better than landfilling in most cases, we think. But there are environmental concerns about that by some. And in the long run, rural counties have said over and over they really don't want urban county biosolids spread on the land. So the treatment plant folks are aware of that and are interested in doing something else. But what the something else is very unclear. And since the energy's been removed from it, it's very unclear exactly how that connects with us. So So there's sort of there's a dialogue there, but there isn't a lot of clarity about what comes next, except for utilizing the limited amount of underutilized capacity that exists now, which we're completely supportive of.
Thinking we have about time for one more question, Asia, and we touched on it a little bit. We all have different perceptions of things, different definitions, but there is some potential ick factor associated with other materials. So, and the problem materials perspective, and then Heidi will ask you this: what do we do for problem materials? Obviously, if we're going for everything, but we have to look at everything to get to 75% and beyond. What about problem materials?
Problem materials, what do you want to say? Do you define problem materials?
Define problem materials and how do we address them?
Well, problem materials to me are ones that have major operational problems. We don't have a recovery system for them, or they're just hazardous and toxic, pretty much. And we've been focusing on those. But we only have so many resources. So right now we're only focused on getting the existing programs to work, like carpet, which is a big volume ticket item, and the thermostats and paint, which were huge volumes and had issues with hazardous waste facilities. We'd love to see that money, you know, go to collect more pesticides and other things, and then hopefully if we get EPR for all the hazardous waste, get all those costs off your back, we can actually send a signal to producers to stop making all this toxic stuff, because it's very expensive to manage at the end of life. So we've been really, you know, again, focusing on volume problems. And I know mattresses came up because it was a problem here in Oakland. They had 30 a day being dumped on the streets. The Business Association was very upset. Do they know which option they wanted in the legislative solution? I don't think so. They just wanted a solution. So that's how these things come up. Sometimes you can't plan on it, you can't structure it. It just kind of bubbles up and happens. So we take it as it comes. And with mattresses, we just provided information. Connecticut and Rhode Island had already tried EPR bills for mattresses. In Connecticut, it actually had all the votes. They were ready to adopt it. And then, unfortunately, a Republican filibuster is the reason that the vote never happened. It affects you and I had talked about the influence of money in politics and how this affects everything. In Massachusetts, they couldn't pass a bottle bill this year because of the influence. It wasn't from the people. The people wanted the bill. But the influence of money on the legislative process, again, stopped it from happening. They also failed to pass for the 11th year in a row electronics EPR. So these are, and this is not because the people don't want it, and this is why we have to all work together, get educated. What are the problem products we all want to go after? We can all agree, but at the end of the day, somebody's going to go to a legislator and say, there's mattresses in my district, and I want them dealt with now, and then that's a problem product.
Mark, what does CAW want to do on problem products?
You know, I think Heidi has kind of described the situation perfectly in terms of we really don't have the luxury of picking and choosing the issues. We react to the issues that get put on the table. And so sometimes that isn't pretty. Sometimes that isn't quite as organized and comprehensive as we might like. But that's how we move the ball forward, is when problems have been put on the table, we try and fit that into our recycling policy or recycling program solution. And we've actually been pretty successful with that. And I think that, you know, I'm hopeful that at some point in time, you know, there used to be the story of, you know, the 100th monkey. There comes at some point in time when you have such this same concept has been happening over and over in different areas that there's kind of like a comprehensive recognition that we need to kind of be doing it the same way. So we may have a slightly different approach to getting into maybe the same place in terms of comprehensive producer responsibility. But our solution right now, the strategy that seems to be working, is reacting to problems. The problems get put on the table, and we focus on selling that problem to the legislature. This is one of the things that your constituents are asking you to deal with this year, and we try and fit that into our recycling policy framework. And I'm not sure, again, in part because of the influence of money in politics, in part because of the attention span of policymakers, in part because of the free market democracy that we live in, I'm not sure that we have an opportunity to change that system. I think we need to take advantage of that system and move the solutions as best we can, reacting to those problems. Mattresses ended up being, you know, none of us were talking about mattresses last year. It wasn't on the table in terms of producer responsibility. But it was a real problem that emerged, that sprang up from the local government level, and I think that my perception is we got lucky at the moment. We've gotten lucky with a fairly weak manufacturing association that wasn't really expecting anything either. And at the moment, it looks like we've got a pretty good policy that I think we can then roll out to other problem materials as those problems develop.
So Gary, mattresses and problem materials. Problems are often thrown on local government folks. And in this case, mattresses have not been thrown in your backyard. They've been dumped on your porch.
We have the largest mattress recycler in California in our county, CRRA, operated by Sid Vincent de Paul. We've spent years and years working with them to develop that infrastructure and that operation. And our primary concern with the Hancock bill, which we told Lonnie staff early on, was whatever you do, don't do anything that would disturb CRRA's business model, because they're a nonprofit. They provide jobs for people who don't otherwise have jobs. It's a wonderful model, and don't mess with it. We do have the luxury, though, of being proactive more often than reactive, although all of us do both, of course. So mattresses were not on our proactive list. They're not a top priority. We feel like we have a certain amount of success in that field, and we want to maintain that success. It wasn't something we picked as a priority for EPR. Our focus in EPR was batteries for a couple of years. We chose that for a reason. We think we moved the national dialogue on that some. We don't have a bill yet in California for reasons that Heidi has explained, essentially money in politics. And that's too bad, but that's how it is. Our focus going forward is on certain niches in purchasing. So, for example, we're focused on institutional kitchens. And institutional kitchens and the amount of food they purchase that they don't need to serve the people that they serve. We helped buy LeanPath software for the UC Berkeley dining system, and they've been implementing it, and they've saved someplace in the low teens in terms of their food purchasing bill by simply being more careful about what they cook, what they serve, how they handle it. And this is all behind the counter. We're not even talking about scraps on the front end where people throw things off their plates. It's just on the back end and the preparation end. They've had low teens success in reducing the amount of food that they purchase and therefore ultimately throw away. And it's very interesting, the economics, because I think it was 16%, if I remember the number right, and around a quarter of their expenses are in the purchase of food, which means that they basically save about 4% on their gross revenue, which is a CPI increase for 1 or 2 years for their workers, without any increase to the students who are having to pay for that food service. So in this economy, that's really a tremendous, tremendous success created by waste prevention. And so there's some niches like that we're focusing on. We're looking at ways of communicating with customers in hardware stores or other places where a lot of household hazardous waste products are purchased. And how do we tell people the large end-of-life costs that exist, either through a real advanced disposal fee or through a virtual advanced disposal fee? Somehow communicate to people when you buy these things, there's a large end-of-life cost. And that's part of a strategy ultimately to support EPR. We're not trying to do ADFs instead of EPR. We're trying to do ADFs because we found that we couldn't get EPR to go where we wanted it to go. So we'll come back to the local level and we'll do what has been done so often, which is innovate at the local level. And then as multiple innovations occur, industry will get on board because they don't really want a proliferation of local regulations.
Gary, thank you. Scott? Let's close this and in a different version of that same question related to problem materials. Policy, politics, strategy perspective, and maybe touch on term limits if that has any impact on being successful and moving things forward on capturing and dealing with problem materials.
The couple things first that come to mind for me are, this was sort of the traditional definition of problem material, but interestingly, we've been hearing more from local governments lately about a different material, which is MRF residuals, which seems to be on the top of their list of something they want to be dealt with. There's quite an effort, particularly in Southern California, but in some Northern California cities as well, to provide a pathway for alternative treatment of MRF residuals, primarily thermal treatment of that material. And so that's something that has taken a lot of our time lately, which particularly because we're getting such a strong signal from the locals that this is of critical importance to them. And with respect to these materials that have been discussed here, I think CalRecycle as well. I mean, largely at this point is implementation. I mean, we have a lot on our plate with just paint and carpet to make sure that we successfully implement those policies. It's